The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny, with the fresh warmth of a full summer day. The flowers were blossoming profusely and the grass was richly green.
So reads the opening line to The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, ushering us into a scene of bucolic summertime, open, clear skies, sunshine, growth, abundance. There's activity in the town square of a small village. Families congregate. Children play on the grass.
School was recently over for the summer, and the feeling of liberty sat uneasily on most of them.
One of the boys' pockets is stuffed with stones. A pile is made on the grass. Men speak of planting, rain, tractors, taxes. A Mr. Summers arrives carrying a black wooden box. The congregation forms a circle around him. The lottery begins. We know little of the horror that is to come. When Jackson's short story first reared its head in the pages of The New Yorker in 1948, it hit the public consciousness like a jolt of raw electricity. This wasn't your typical slice of Americana. Letters of complaint poured into the magazine offices as the public wrestled with such a damning evocation of American small-town life. Readers cancelled their subscriptions. Jackson recounted how even her own mother sent her a stern letter of discouragement. Dad and I did not care at all for your story in The New Yorker. It does seem, dear, that this gloomy kind of story is what all you young people think about these days. Why don't you write something to cheer people up? According to one of Jackson's biographers, the writer received letters for the rest of her life, demanding explanation of the lottery's hidden meanings. On its publication, some readers were confused as to whether it was actually fiction or real-life reporting. They wanted to know where these events took place and could they go and watch them. Jackson's writing had delivered a literary gut punch to the public's sensibilities in such a concise and visceral manner that The Lottery would go on to become one of the most infamous short stories of 20th century America. The lottery is an event carried out year after year, presumably since the village's founding. It involves all generations, from the old to the very young. A tradition that has survived and become normalized through repetition. The village seems plucked straight from a Norman Rockwell painting. It is somewhere in New England, but the exact location is not specified. Life seems simple here. People know each other. There's a familial closeness about the townsfolk, 300 in total, as they mingle and chat about the mundane, everyday elements of their lives. A very normal American town populated by very normal American people. But here, in the midst of this normality, a mysterious ritual is set into motion. Over the years, there has been much discussion about the instruments used in this ritual, in particular the black box brought forth by Mr. Summers and placed on a three-legged stool in the centre of the congregation.
The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago, and the black box now resting on the stool had been put into use even before Old Man Warner, the oldest man in the town, was born. Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box.
Though some customs have evolved over time, the box remains the immovable centerpiece that binds the lottery to its origins. It's the longest surviving relic, a link to times long past, and so, in the minds of the villagers, it must be revered. It is filled with slips of paper by Mr. Summers, who we learn is the owner of the local coal mine, and Mr. Graves, the postman. With the box now in position, Mr. Summers reaches inside and mixes the papers around in preparation. Their selection will decide the outcome of the lottery. There are dusty recollections of a chant of some sort that had been allowed to lapse as the years went by.
There had been a recital of some sort, performed by the official of the lottery, a perfunctory, tuneless chant that had been rattled off duly each year.
Collective memory loss of the exact details of the customs surrounding the lottery has left the village with its current manifestation. This chant remains a mystery. We could imagine any number of scenarios: a paganistic incantation, a Christian prayer spoken low and monotone. Recollections on how the official would stand or how he would address the congregation differ. Some say there was a specific salute, but this has also been discontinued. The reader could surmise that we are witnessing a modern interpretation of something much more ancient. There is no evidence of written record with strict directives. Rather, the ritual seems to be kept alive in the minds of the villagers, passed down from generation to generation, like some kind of oral folk tradition. Jackson's writing is stripped back and matter-of-fact. As the scene develops, it feels like something very regular is occurring. The reader is just a bystander watching the unfolding of a pastoral community gathering. The villagers go along with the proceedings in an almost mechanical fashion, as if they are about to decide how they might divide up chores: the painting of a town building, the clearing of a communal green space, the tending of lawns. The lottery seems almost perfunctory, something to get out of the way so people can continue on with their day.
Well now, Mr. Summers said soberly, guess we better get started, get this over with so as we can get back to work. Anybody ain't here?
But something's not quite right. Instinctually, we can sense the low breathing of a darker truth just below the surface. The black box sits in waiting, inanimate but charged with a sort of supernatural foreboding. What does it contain? What is the prize for this lottery? All we really know at this point is that it happens annually and the villagers are committed to seeing it through without question. One of the last to arrive at the scene is a Mrs. Hutchinson, Tessie to most. She is running late and bustles her way into the crowd, chatting and making little jokes as she does so. Caught up in housework, she had forgotten the date, the 27th. She locates the rest of her family, her husband and 3 children, and makes her way to them. Again, she jokes, to Mr. Summers this time.
Mrs. Hutchinson reached her husband, and Mr. Summers, who had been waiting, said cheerfully, "Thought we were going to have to get on without you, Tessie." Mrs. Hutchinson said, grinning, "Wouldn't have me leave my dishes in the sink now, would you, Joe?" And soft laughter ran through the crowd as the people stirred back into positions after Mrs. Hutchinson's arrival.
Mr. Summers turns back to the congregation, addressing them in a jovial manner. The lottery is set to begin. It takes some time and back and forth between the villagers and Mr. Summers before the proceedings are ready to commence. Summers checks on the attendance of various people. The heads of each family, the men, are to be the first to draw from the black box. This is the tradition and must be adhered to. Throughout the story, Jackson peppers the text with brief clues as to the culture of this place. Christian values, God, man, then his wife and children. Still, there is no explicit mention of a religious faith.
"All ready," he called. "Now I'll read the names, heads of families first, and the men come up and take a paper out of the box. Keep the paper folded in your hand without looking at it until everyone has had a turn. Everything clear?"
These directions are clearly just customary, as everyone present is so familiar with the ceremony. The tone is still a matter of fact. The congregation is hushed, as Mr. Summers begins to call out the names of the men: Adams, Allen, Anderson, Bentham. The men shuffle forward, pick from the box, and return to the crowd without much fuss, holding their slips of paper concealed. We hear snatches of commentary from the villagers.
Seems like there's no time at all between lotteries anymore, Mrs. Delcroix said to Mrs. Graves in the back row. Seems like we got through with the last one only last week. Time sure goes fast, Mrs. Graves said.
The list continues. Clark, Delacroix. Mrs. Delacroix holds her breath while her husband steps forward to pick from the box. Mr. Graves, the postman, takes his turn. The crowd is now littered with men holding the folding papers in their hands, turning them over nervously. Anxiety is starting to manifest. Is this excitement or a growing fear of what is to come? The ritual continues. Harper, Hutchinson. Then comes one of the most revealing exchanges between two men.
They do say, Mr. Adams said to old man Warner, who stood next to him, that over in the North Village, they're talking of giving up the lottery. Old man Warner snorted. Pack of crazy fools, he said. Listening to the young folks. Nothing's good enough for them. Next thing you know, they'll be wanting to go back to live in caves. Nobody work anymore. Live that way for a while. Used to be a saying around. Lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. First thing you know, we'd all be eating stewed chickweed and acorns.
Mr. Warner, the elder, the longest-standing member, blurts out his condemnation of societal change. How the youth wish to forsake tradition and drag civilization down into some unruly pit. No work, no morals. And then his memory of the line, lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. Has Mr. Warner revealed the reason for the whole ceremony? The lottery, a fertility rite, a pagan appeasement of Mother Nature to bless the harvest. Up to this point, the reader may have been expecting the lottery to bear a prize for a lucky winner, but now it seems that we are dealing with something much more esoteric. Is the village, in fact, driven by some type of cultish belief system? Mr. Warner tells us there's always been a lottery. He is clearly rattled by the suggestion that other towns have started to slide away from this tradition. He envisions the only outcome to be ruinous. He could be the voice of hardline American conservatism. The village must cleave to the past or perish in his mind. He is the fading gasp of a generational voice that perceives a takeover from unwise, belligerent forces that hold no respect for the past. Mr. Summers reaches his turn and selects a paper slip from the box. Then it's Warner's turn, who proclaims it's his 77th year in the lottery. We get to the last name and there's a pause. The crowd grows still before all the slips of paper are then opened. A murmur spreads throughout the crowd. Who is it? Who is it? After a few moments we learn it's Bill Hutchinson, Tessie's husband, who has picked the winning slip. But still we wonder, what has he won?
Bill Hutchinson was standing quiet, staring down at the paper in his hand. Suddenly, Tessie Hutchinson shouted to Mr. Summers, "You didn't give him enough time to take any paper he wanted. I saw you. It wasn't fair."
Her easy, joking demeanour of before is suddenly broken. Now that the lottery has chosen her family, she is panicking. Before, she seemed happy to go along as usual. Other women tell her to be a sport, to accept the outcome. That's the rule. Her husband Bill chimes in, telling her to shut up. He too knows that the ritual cannot be broken. His loyalty is to the lottery over his wife. Now Bill must draw again, this time for his whole family. One person must remain. Tessie continues to protest the fairness of the outcome, but Bill stays engaged, listing all those under his household: himself, his wife, his 3 children. Again, Tessie protests.
"I think we ought to start over. Mrs. Hutchinson said as quietly as she could. "I tell you, it wasn't fair. You didn't give him time enough to choose. Everybody saw that."
The process continues as Tessie repeatedly appeals to her fellow villagers, desperate now, but the ritual will not be stopped. Mr. Summers is calm and collected as ever, just going through the motions, nudging the lottery towards its climax. The Hutchinson children all draw from the black box. Then Tessie must draw. Finally, Bill draws the last slip. Mr. Warner, the old man, berates the behaviours displayed by Tessie Hutchinson.
"It's not the way it used to be," old man Warner said clearly. "People ain't the way they used to be."
All slips are blank except one. Bill forces the slip from his wife's hand. It bears the black spot. Tessie has been chosen. The crowd stirs. Mr. Summers moves things forward.
"All right, folks," Mr. Summers said. "Let's finish quickly." Although the villagers had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box, they still remembered to use stones. The pile of stones the boys had made earlier was ready. There were stones on the ground with the glowing scraps of paper that had come out of the box.
The full horror of what we have been witnessing is revealed as the villagers gather up stones from the pile which had been laid out on the grass earlier. We are in the midst of a ritual sacrifice, a mob killing, that is carried out every year with blind adherence. Mrs. Hutchinson will be stoned openly by her fellow people.
Mrs. Delacroix selected a stone so large she had to pick it up with both hands and turned to Mrs. Dunbar. "Come on," she said, "hurry up."
The barbarity is almost impossible to believe. Even the children have stones, including Tessie's own child, little Davy. He will engage in the brutalization of his own mother. Tessie is surrounded, covering her face with her hands, pleading desperately. It all happens so swiftly, without theatrics, and then the utterly chilling climax.
"It isn't fair," she said. A stone hit her on the side of the head. Old man Warner was saying, come on, everyone." Steve Adams was in the front of the crowd of villagers, with Mrs. Graves beside him. "It isn't fair, it isn't right," Mrs. Hutchinson screamed. And then they were upon her.
The lottery has remained in the collective imaginations of readers since its publication. It's Jackson's most well-known work and has been studied by generations of Americans, cementing its place firmly in the literary canon. But what makes a story that seems so simple, so deeply affecting? In essence, the lottery forces us to address some of the most unpleasant aspects of human nature, highlighting how our obedience to unquestioned authority and tradition can lead people to carry out unspeakable acts of evil and violence. In a society that believes itself to be civilized, we can become complacent, scoffing at cultures that came before us as barbaric and blind in their savagery. The lottery unmasks the dangers that lurk just below the surface of respectability, and how flimsy our notions of what being civilized actually means. If there is a perceived gain for our own community, one that everyone agrees will benefit the whole, like the promise of a full harvest, people can easily slide into practices that manifest horrific outcomes for the victim. In the lottery, Mrs. Hutchinson is just one person versus the village. She is disposable when laid before the altar of what the other villagers have been convinced is the greater good. The brutality of her public murder is anaesthetized by generational indoctrination, allowing the perpetrators to abandon their humanity in a crazed annual bloodletting. This particular village is home to a rural American community. There are only 300 inhabitants. We could surmise that it is cut off from outside influences for the most part, and therefore has preserved this ritual unchecked. Its culture has become somewhat fossilized. Old Man Warner growls in disdain at the mention of other towns who have embraced more progressive ideas. But even here, in his village, the people have been undisciplined in their preservation of the tradition that they seem so hell-bent on continuing. They can't remember the exact details of the ceremony. The box has worn down to shabbiness. The customs are discarded willy-nilly. There is a suggestion that they are in fact abusing tradition or have lost touch with its meaning, preserving only the most based, animalistic part. The cruelty of human nature is the slowest to die out. Jackson's masterstroke, perhaps, is the sketching of everyday details as though we are eavesdropping on the inhabitants of a pastoral painting. The villagers seem down to earth and quite ordinary. They could be the people of any town, anywhere. It's probably why the reveal at the end is so terrifying to so many. They could be our community. They could be us. America at the time had just come out of World War II, with a sense of great victory over the most destructive malevolent forces, the heroes that stomped out evil and saved humanity. But that evil was over there. Jackson places it in the heart of American culture. It is no wonder why the reaction was so unhinged. Even though we can feel the terror of Mrs. Hutchinson when it dawns on her what is going to happen, we also know that she is a willing participant in the lottery. She is nonchalant and chatting on her arrival. She is only too happy to take part in this ritual, and we must believe she would carry out the stoning on any one of her fellow villagers if the outcome was different. It's a chilling realization and speaks to a tendency in people to distance themselves from inhumane acts when they are not directly affected by them. If the wolf is out of sight and wreaking havoc away from our door, we can turn a blind eye. Only now that the monster is bearing down on Tessie Hutchinson does she choose to speak out, to protest the unfairness of the situation. It's a timeless indictment of humans' self-absorption and lack of empathy for the suffering of others. The text has been dissected for over half a century now, the names examined and compared to historical figures, the symbolism explored to no end. Is it a commentary on war, on political ideologies, on religion, on paganism? All this is contained in the brevity of a single afternoon in a small, unnamed village. One of the starkest moments at the end of the story is when the narrator bluntly states, "A stone hit her on the side of the head." From a grammatical standpoint, the sentence is structured so that no one actually threw the stone. It's as if this stone hit Tessie of its own accord. All the villagers participate, but no one individually takes responsibility for the murder. It's a horror we should all be wary of, the evil that manifests when individual thought is swallowed by groupthink and the mindless violence of the mob.
I'm going to climb up Jacob's ladder. I'm going to climb up Jacob's ladder some of those days. Hallelujah. I'm going to climb up Jacob's ladder. I'm going to climb up Jacob's ladder some of those days. I'm going to climb up higher and higher.